he'll go maybe call an architect. And the architect, if he's not one who's accustomed to designing for buildings of faith, and he himself is not a believer, a lot of times they're driven by greed in a lot of senses. We say that's how our country's kind of got in this situation. And they will go and they'll design something, and and they'll walk away with all the cash, if you will, and the pastor is end up with a set of plans that he can't build. So first, sit down and estimate the cost. That means actually sit there and count to see how much is it going to cost, to see if he has enough money to complete it. So now, fundamentally, this is really simple. I mean, it's almost elementary, and it sounds almost like, common sense. But first, we have to say on this hand, how much do I have? And over here, how much is it going to take? And if what you have and what it takes don't equal up, or what you have exceeds what it's going to take, then you need to kind of stop, and go back to the drawing board, but keep your cash. Don't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to find out that you can't do something. And I'm telling you, we've seen it time and time and time again. So he says, whether he have sufficient to complete it, for if he lays the foundation. Now, I can tell you, I've seen tons of foundations laid. Tons of buildings go up and end up being boarded up because they couldn't build it. Or even laying the foundation includes getting full detailed plans and specs and engineering and all that, and can't finish it. He said, and he's not able to finish it. Everyone who sees him will ridicule him, saying, this fellow began and was not able to finish it. So then, on the next scripture, Jesus even expounds a little more. He says, or suppose there was a king that was going off to war against another king. He said, wouldn't he first sit down? Everybody say, sit down. Yeah. He said, wouldn't he first sit down and with his counselors? In a multitude of counsel, there's what? There's safety. He says, and to discuss whether his army of 10,000, here it is, he's made an assessment of what he has, will be able to defeat an army with 20,000. That's what it's going to take. He says, marching against him. So fundamentally, that is the base scripture that I think that really articulates in simple terms, the concept of how do we start a building project.
Frank, we're glad you explained those biblical principles, but can you tell me what are some of the most common mistakes that pastors make when trying to start a church building process?
Well, I'm glad you said that, Tim. I mean, I've said it once, but when leaders cast the vision for a new building project, the most common and costly mistake is they have the design complete, and then they go out and promote it. You have this big rendering and coming soon, and you go put on your land, coming soon. And everybody's, start even putting on your church programs. And, and you have this big facility, this facility that you're going to build. And then it says, then you go out and you secure a contractor. So you go out and you'll say, I need to, let's take bids on this. And you have contractors that are bidding on this all over the place. And so you finally select the contractor, and then you say, okay, we've got our contractor, we've got our architect, now let's go to the bank and see if somebody's going to give us the money. Okay, that's that cart that I was talking about that's in front of the horse. Okay, the first thing we want to do is we want to see first, we want to establish a budget, and we want to go get a preliminary approval from the lender to find out, whether we're going to be able to do it before we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. Go to the next slide. So the question is basically, where do we begin?
Where do we begin?
Yeah.
So, you told me about some of the principles, you told me about a couple of common mistakes, but what do we do now?
Yeah.
What are the first steps?
You always begin with the end in mind. Fast forward, as you think about it, you say, okay, God is leading us to build this church. Okay, push fast forward. Go all the way to the end. When that mortgage comes in, unless you're building this debt-free, and of course, if you're going to be build this debt-free, then, you have to have heard from God. Okay. Before you count that cost. Okay. But if you're not going debt-free and you fast forward to, we're in the church, woo, we're in there, yes, and we're celebrating, and all of a sudden, okay, here comes that first mortgage payment. You open up the envelope and you look at it, $10,000. Okay, now you put this down and I'm gonna just kind of like, okay, so fast forward to that. You want to know what is that going to be? How much are we going to have to pay on a monthly basis? And a lot of times we don't like to fast forward to that point. Now, later on, we'll get into a little bit more about establishing that budget, but you begin with the end in mind.
Let's hold on there. I want to go back a little bit. Frank kind of touched on what some of the common mistakes were, but we got a couple of people up here who are architects and master planners, also want to get their insight on what they think is some of the most common mistakes. Dan or Don, feel free, to discuss what do you think some of the most common mistakes are.
Well, I'm going to start. As an architect, what I have observed is that a lot of churches do not have the clarity of what they really want or need in a project. And the first step is for you to really be able to, as a church leadership, to reach consensus. And then once you reach consensus, you need to be prayerfully seeking God's will for your direction. Now, I have learned over the years that there's tools that churches can use to be able to try to develop that consensus by establishing your vision and reaching out and determining what your goals are. And I will leave for you today, before I leave here, this checklist and this worksheet. Because if you just merely take this worksheet, you will be able to articulate what your vision and goals are for your church and your church campus. And then once you hire a qualified architect, they'll be able to take that and begin to create a plan.
Now, Dan, you got a lot of experience in master planning, financing, and et cetera. So what have some of the common mistakes you have seen?
Well, just to go along with what Don said and also what Frank said earlier, the thing must start at a starting point. The concern you always wind up with when you're trying to develop anything, whether it's building a house or trying to just create a future for yourself through planning, is getting to the first step. Our company is called Alpha because we're a first step company. What we try to do is we try to work with churches to understand what is their unique calling. Every church isn't called to the same calling. I believe just like every one of us is different, every one of us is loved by God. Every church is different. It has a different calling. So what we want to do is we want to, as Don says, understand what the goals and the objectives of that church are. What is the church's vision? What is its unique calling? So one of the first things we find out and ask him is, what makes you different? What is your calling? What is God giving you this impetus to build and to grow? What is the fundamental reasons for that? We also take a look at some other things that are pretty important as well. We want to know, based upon what your church's goals and objectives are, what you're trying to see happen from the standpoint of your real purpose. What is your decision driver? What is causing it? Is your children's area too small? Do you have a sanctuary that will not allow you to grow? What are those decision drivers to get you to that point? Then you need to do some very basic things, and we all do this with every decision we make, but somehow, I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but I'm a trustee of a church, and often when our people get together, it's like we leave our brains at the front door before we start our meetings. And that's not a very good thing, because God gave them to you for a very good reason. So the idea is we need to sit down and really understand what are our options as a church. Do we have enough land here to really grow the vision that we have? Is there something very sacred about our location other than what happens here? Because what happens here can happen somewhere else. Is there a desire in our long-term ministry goals to see our church have multiple sites, even multiple sites in different cities?